All right, welcome into this episode of the Chiefs LS Podcast. Farzin Vasugian here with you. Very excited for this episode. Little time to waste, so let's get right into it. Joining me, second day in a row, we got a special guest. You guys definitely very familiar with his name. Heavily involved with the Chiefs, both on and off the field. Former Pro Bowl long snapper for the Kansas City Chiefs, and also was part of the Kansas City Chiefs radio network, and is still involved in the media today, doing a lot of things with the organization. Very happy to have on Kendall Gammon here on the Chiefs LS Podcast. Kendall, thank you so much for joining us here on the podcast. It's an honor to have you. How are you?
I'm doing very well, Farzin. Thank you.
Oh, what have you been up to? I mean, I know with retirement, you got involved with the Chiefs radio network. You left right after they won Super Bowl 54. What have you been up to since then?
Well, I've always worked for Pittsburgh State University. I'm the director. I'm in development, so basically helping raise funds for them. I did take a year off, and then I'm still actually have a 3-hour pregame show on 101 The Fox. So I do that along with Mundo in the mornings on 95.7 on Mondays and Fridays. I do Jason Anderson and In the Zone on Fridays. And then also I do hits on 101 also on Mondays and Fridays. So all of this during football season. But doing those things, I speak probably 35, 40 times a year all around the U.S., but probably mainly in the Midwest region on a myriad of topics. And then also I help with War Horses for Veterans. We bring in vets and first responders from all over the U.S. for a week of equine therapy out in South Johnson County. We have 50 acres, and through exceptional horsemanship, we help those first responders and combat veterans, deal with some of the issues that they've had to deal with. So very gratifying.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really cool that you involved and helped those people out. They definitely need it. Yes. Is there a way for people to get involved if they want to help contribute in any way?
Absolutely. I appreciate that. Yeah, if you went War Horses for Veterans, so if you go to whfv.org, you can see what War Horse is about. Or we actually we created a new site called warhorsesnetwork.org. And what that is was we found a way to aggregate information for vets and first responders. So not just people who are maybe thinking about going through our program. There's lots of people who would have other needs and different desires. And so we streamlined it, basically made somewhat of a LinkedIn for first responders and vets. And then, of course, the folks who, if they're not a first responder or a vet, they can go in, and when they sign up, if they signed up, it would just be as a friend and supporter of that. But we just tried to aggregate that information and basically just help as many people as we can.
And I know you are also a published author of 2 books, Life's a Snap and Game Plan. Those are both available on Amazon. If you actually go to kendallgammon.com/books, you'll be able to see them there, and it'll direct you to the Amazon link to buy those books. I always think it's interesting when celebrities, athletes, they want to go ahead and publish a book. What motivated you to want to write those books?
You know what? I always had an interest in just trying to take some of what I learned in the NFL into, as I say, the boardroom. But my first one was a motivational, inspirational. My second one was a leadership and team building, and I just tried to take what I learned in the NFL in different avenues, out into the world with the books to make a difference. I was doing a lot of speaking, so that's kind of the best business card you could ever have as well. And then, a lot of things is I dealt with a lot of issues growing up and with my family life. And so my first book, I talked about that just because I'm just big on that and trying to be, as vulnerable as possible. So, maybe other people can learn from the mistakes that I've made or the issues I've dealt with. And they're too long and notorious to list, but a lot of things. And so hopefully just have a chance to help people.
All right, if you guys want to check out his books, again, Life's a Snap and Game Plan over at kendallgammon.com/books. It'll direct you to the Amazon links if you guys are interested in checking those out. So you were born in Rose Hill, Kansas. For those who do not know, where geographically, if you can explain, it's close to Wichita, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's about 15 minutes outside. It's straight east of Derby or straight south of Andover. Yeah, I was born in Wichita, Kansas. At the time, my family lived in Mulvane. I lived in Mulvane until I was age 10. Then we moved over to Rose Hill. And again, just another fairly same size town. So yeah, small town, small farming community.
What motivated you to want to go to Pittsburgh State?
It was about the only place that really wanted me, quite honestly. So, yeah, I had some offers to walk on as a preferred walk on at larger schools, but one knock on me, which was very correct, which was I just wasn't aggressive enough, and I wasn't the player that needed to be at a Division I school, quite honestly, at the time. I grew into that a little bit, but really the only two schools that offered me a scholarship were Pitt State and Washburn, and they were partial scholarships at that. And when I visited Pitt State, everything just kind of clicked. It was easy to see that that was the place for me.
And when you got into the NFL, you were drafted in the 11th round, which I'm sure is kind of weird to hear because they don't have 11
Right.
rounds anymore. But you ended up playing for you went from Pittsburgh, Kansas to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So I'm sure you got a lot of those jokes over the time during your time with the Steelers. But what was that experience like? Because you guys, if I remember correctly, won an AFC championship there.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, it's interesting going from Pittsburgh and the Gorillas to Pittsburgh with the H. I always said I was never in Pittsburgh. I was either in Kansas or I was in Pennsylvania. And yeah, it was a dream come true. As you said, 11th round pick, and only 7 rounds exist now. So, obviously that I would be a free agent in today's world. But as I joke about the fact is I was the 291st person taken that year. So right away feeling really good about myself. But really, you come out of college and all you can ask for is a chance, and that's what I got. I was fortunate. I was an All-American offensive lineman my senior year, All-League my last 3 years, but really not at the level to play in the NFL as a lineman at that point in time. But fortunately, I did have something that was at the NFL level, which was long snapping, and I was fortunate with that. I was lucky that I fell into it. It's kind of a crazy story of how I started long snapping and how that came to be. But yeah, some things just work out.
What was it like joining the Chiefs? What made you want to come back to Kansas City?
Oh, the myriad of reasons. I'd been in the league for 8 years, so now I had kids who were 4-1, or not quite 4, not quite 1. So coming home, being around friends and family, being able to have my kids around their grandparents and all that thing, and then just to the hometown, as it were, of Kansas City, and the Chiefs was just kind of a dream come true. And really, I'd had a chance to come back maybe a couple of years earlier, but at the end of the season, because I was in New Orleans at the time, I hurt my knee during the year. And the Saints offered me a contract during the year, and I just felt like I couldn't pass it up because I didn't know what was wrong with my knee. I was using a lot of medical help to get through the games the rest of the year, which is something that just a lot of us have to do at times. So it wasn't until 2 years later, when I was a free agent, that I got a call from the Chiefs that said they were very interested. They wanted to bring me in, but it was also on the day that things had happened with 58.
Derek Thomas.
Sorry, Derek Thomas. And they said, we've got a lot of things going on with that, so just bear with us, but we do want to bring you in here. And so I was fortunate. I came in, and everything worked out.
And that was Gunther was coaching, was the head coach at the time. Is that right?
Yes, he was.
And then
that was his second year.
Yeah, and then Dick Vermeil comes in, and I think there was a lot of excitement at the time with Carl Peterson bringing in Dick Vermeil. What was that moment like when you guys found out that Dick Vermeil was going to be the head coach?
Well, obviously, you know who Dick Vermeil is if you're in the NFL. Of course, he had won a Super Bowl not too many years before that with St. Louis, and of course had retired. I think, as he would admit now, it was too soon. He should have stayed. But he and Carl had a big relationship. It was interesting. My first year with Kansas City, when Gunther was there, I remember when Vermeil came in during a pregame when we were getting ready, and it was long before the game started, with Carl, and he was showing him around everything, and just basically, I mean, it didn't look like anything, but I remember in my mind thinking, okay, this is more than a coincidence. I mean, I just wondered, and of course, it transpired the next year in terms of him bringing him in to replace Gunther.
2003 was a really special year, and special teams, got all the glory that year with what Dante Hall was doing. I'm curious if you can talk about 2003 and what that was like, and what did it mean for special teams to really be on the map? Because Dante Hall was at one point considered an MVP candidate that season.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I think there might have been maybe 3 games in a row that he returned a punt or a kickoff or a touchdown. I forget what it was and how
It was
many he
4.
did in general. 4. Okay, so
Yeah.
I mean, some of the things he did was just spectacular, and I don't know why, but Dante and I got along really really well. And we came in the year before. I'd come in as a free agent. He'd come in as a draft pick. So we just kind of hit it off a little bit, but every time he got on the field, just the excitement there of the chance of taking one back, and how the X factor was born and everything with that, and it just kind of fed on himself. And I'll give Frank Gans Jr. a lot of credit because he was a very good special teams coach. He knew how to motivate. He knew how to connect with the players. He was a much younger coach than a lot of the other guys. And of course, he had grown up in a coaching family because his dad, Frank Gans Sr., of course, had been with the Chiefs, had been even a head coach at one point in time. So, yeah, it was an interesting time for sure because, again, every time a punt or kick was happening and Dante was out there, you knew something special had a chance to happen.
The following season was a special one for you personally because that was your first Pro Bowl bid. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that's the first time an actual long snapper was invited to a Pro Bowl. What did that mean for you personally?
Yeah, it was really cool, and you're right. It was the first time that a long snapper was added to a Pro Bowl roster, and it was actually Coach Cowher with the Steelers that added me. And I remember I was going. It was after the season was done, and I'm going to pick up my sons at elementary school, and I get a call, and I see it's a 412 area code, and of course I remember that's Pittsburgh, PA area code, and I answer it, and they say hello, and I say hello, and they say. Kendall, this is Coach Cowher. And I said, yeah, no, I recognize the voice. I know who this is. And he goes, I'm just calling to tell you that I've because they had lost the AFC Championship game, the week before, and the loser of the AFC Championship game goes and coaches the Pro Bowl. So he said, I just wanted to let you know that I'm adding you to the Pro Bowl roster. So you're coming over to Hawaii with us. And it was amazing. I mean, I started tearing up. I told him, I go, man, you made me cry when you cut me, and you're making me cry again. I just said thank you, and I could tell that he it really was cool. The fact that I could tell that he genuinely enjoyed being able to tell me, and he was happy that he added me to the roster. And I learned later on that he'd told a few folks during the week. And just had said to folks, like, guess who I'm adding to the roster, and he would say my name, and I just thought that was the coolest thing. I mean, I had always kept in touch with him in terms of when we played games against him when I was with New Orleans or Kansas City. I'd always go up to him and thank him for bringing me in this league. I mean, I know he cut me, and that was rough. The only time I'd ever experienced something like that. But he was also the part of the regime and the coach who brought me into this league, and I would always thank him. And he was never going to seek me out. Not that he was being big time or anything, but you're not going to seek out everybody. So, oftentimes when I speak, I tell that story with the intent of, never burn a bridge. I mean, no matter how upset it made you or how disappointing it was, because you just never know. And there's no doubt in my mind. I mean, you could ask anybody. If I had been sour about that and had never kept in touch with him, or worse yet, had said bad things about him, then certainly that wouldn't have happened. So, it's just one of those lessons I think you learn.
That's really interesting because I had Eric Warfield on the podcast a couple of years ago, and he kind of mentioned, he took it personal when he was let go by the Chiefs, but then he learned over the years. Yeah, of course. He learned over the years, he and I'm paraphrasing, he basically found a way to appreciate it because they did give him an opportunity after all. How do you come around to accepting that, hey, look, this is part of the business. This is the way things work out?
You know what? I was aware of that it was a business anyhow. I was already an PA rep for a year at Pittsburgh, and that's the business side of things. And I ended up being a rep 10 of my 15 years in the NFL, and that's voted on by your teammates. So to me, that was the greatest honor. The fact that they thought enough of me to represent them when I was running against NFL Pro Bowlers and future Hall of Famers, that they had enough trust in me that they wanted to elect me. But it's tough because most everybody that gets in the NFL, you were the best on your team. You did great things. And to finally be told that, you know what, you're not wanted here and that it doesn't work out, that's tough. That's the only time in my life, honestly, that I had ever been cut from a team or told by a team or a coach that your services are not wanted here. And it is what it is. You just have to understand that it is a business. Now, that being said, I always said that the NFL was the best temporary job you could have, and I also always went on to say that that seat, I was just renting it until somebody else, because the one thing that's undefeated is Father Time, and the fact is the NFL shield endures even long after you leave the game.
I got to ask you, as a long snapper, because Bill Belichick, he's on the media now, and a lot of people love to talk about the fact that he's smiling more because he came off always tense and didn't seem interested in doing the media thing when he was doing press conferences. But I'll never forget when he was asked about, and it was a great question by a reporter, if long snapping is that important of a position that you can't just use a center or another offensive lineman, that you have to actually have an individual person just for long snapping. And he gave the longest answer ever.
Yeah, I remember that.
As a long snapper, did you love that kind of thing coming from Bill Belichick?
Yeah, it's kind of nice. It's coming from anybody, because it's appreciation of something that honestly goes unnoticed. The only time it's generally noticed is if you make a mistake. So if you're doing your job, then nobody knows you, and yeah, that's always nice. I think Mike Leach was somebody who talked about that also. The late Mike Leach talked about long snappers and some things. So yeah.
Well, shortly after your playing career, you did join the Chiefs radio network. And if I recall correctly, you started on the sidelines. And then when Len Dawson decided to step away, you took his place as the radio analyst right next to Mitch Holthus. What was that experience like with the Chiefs radio network?
Well, it was nice being involved in the game still at a certain level. So for 12 great years, did that, enjoyed it. Last game that I called was Super Bowl 54, and that was great. And then I was fortunate enough that 101 The Fox wanted to continue to do a pregame show, so I continue to do that to this day. So I'm still involved to a certain extent. And obviously, with the longest tenure being my 7 years with the Chiefs, I was only with the Steelers 4 and the Saints 4. I'm the hometown kid, and then I live here, so it just really works out well for me.
Well, you did mention your last game with the radio network was Super Bowl 54, and I actually did want to ask you about that because they do have the video clip out there online. I can't remember who posted it, but it's Mitch Holthus basically announcing the final play and letting people know, hey, the Chiefs are now Super Bowl champions. And I think you guys went to a commercial break, and you and Mitch shared a hug in that moment right there. Listen, you've been there for a couple of the disappointing moments in the playoffs, and you've seen a lot of them over the years on the sidelines. What did it mean to be able to witness the Chiefs finally winning that Super Bowl trophy?
Well, it's been 50 years, and just all that frustration of not making the playoffs or getting the playoffs and not winning, and missing it for different reasons. It's just great, and having been a part of the organization for so long, that was wonderful. And then I'm fortunate. I played for the Rooneys with the Steelers, and of course the Hunts with the Chiefs, which I think is two of the best, the best run organizations, family run organizations. So I was fortunate with that. So to see the Hunts enjoy that also, and everything that was about that. I was fortunate that when I came here, I was around the late Lamar Hunt, and he was just a true gentleman, and it was good to me, better than he needed to be. But I think that's how he was to a lot of people. So just being able to be a part of that, to me, I felt very, very fortunate. I mean, right place, right time. I took advantage of my opportunities, but you do have to have some luck in life.
Is there a story you could share, especially for the younger fans who may not be familiar with Lamar Hunt? Just something to maybe share the type of person he was?
Yeah, and this one I like. It involves me, which is this. So I came here, and I didn't know that there was a little bit of some bad blood between Sports Radio 810 and the Chiefs at the time, and whatever. And I didn't know enough to ask or anything. So I actually went to Stephen St. John, and I asked, and he was at the time he was the cohort with Jason Whitlock, and I was interested in getting into the media a little bit. So I asked Stephen, who had interviewed me several times when I came there, just, do you think Jason would be okay with that? And would you be willing to ask him? And he said, yeah, I will. And so he ended up asking me, or I ended up asking that he asked Jason. Long story short, I started going in on Tuesdays, our day off, as an intern. And so I was waking up at 5 a.m. and getting there, and they had their fun with me a little bit in terms of get the coffee and this and that. And I didn't care. Didn't bother me at all. And I ended up getting on the radio some. But the one thing that I found out quickly was, number one, I got called into not Lamar's office, but our GM,
Carl Peterson.
Yeah, sorry. This is being hit in the head too many times. I'm having a football moment. Carl Peterson, and he talked to me about things, and he told me what was up, and I was like, you know what, I didn't realize. He goes, well, he goes, I've heard you on there, and you handled yourself okay, so we're okay with it, but just letting you know. And so, if you're going to do any other stuff, you need to ask us, which is understandable. But what I get to is, I remember Lamar came up to me one day also, and he said, "Hey," he goes, "I enjoy listening to you on 810, and I really especially like, sometimes how you handle the questions with Jason in a funny way or whatever." He goes. In fact, oftentimes I'll pull into the parking lot on Tuesdays when you're on, and I'll just sit there and listen until you're done, which to me I never would have dreamed that anything like that. And that was just, to me, that was just the coolest thing. Nobody else around. He just sought me out and told me that, and just thought I'd like to know, and which was true. And I don't know, I think that's kind of a unique story.
Yeah, and I did want to go back to your playing career for a moment, because I think towards the end, or a season after, that was when, or a season before, excuse me, that's when Dick Vermeil announced he was retiring. I remember it being on the paper the same day the Chiefs played the Steelers, and they needed a little bit of help in the AFC from another team. I can't remember what other team they needed help from, but it came out on the paper that same Sunday. I'm curious, when did you and the other players find out that Dick Vermeil was going to retire?
Oh, when was it? It was actually, he told us in a practice. I forget all that went on. I just remember that we were huddled up in a practice in the indoor facility, and he let everybody know that he was going to be done at the end of this year, and that he just didn't feel like he had the energy to give. He felt like, to be a coach in the NFL, and he's right, you have to have an unbelievable amount of energy. And trust me, Vermeil has a lot of energy, but he just didn't feel like he was at the level that he needed to be to continue to do it. And so he'd be better left in somebody else's hands. So that's what I remember about it. That's a long time ago, though.
You've been with the team for such a long time, both as a player and as an analyst. I'm curious, in all of your years being, at Arrowhead Stadium, is there a moment that you can remember? Because obviously, loudest stadium in the NFL, but is there one moment you can pinpoint where you thought, wow, this is just the loudest it's ever been?
Yeah, and that time is when it was the loudest it's ever been, because when we set the record for 142.2, I was actually there in the end zone, and the minute that we got the word that, yep, we said it, we radioed up. I let Dan Israel know what was going on, and he had somebody helping him as well, and he went back down to me, and then and let me know that Mitch was going to cut to me. So they cut to me, and I let the world know that we had just broken the record, that we were now the world's loudest outdoor stadium at 142.2.
I was there for the Raiders game when we broke that record, and I was so mad when Seattle took it. And so when we got it back, I was really upset. I'm sure everyone in the building was.
Yeah, it was, but I played a long time, broadcast a long time. I think when you look at all the games I've been to, not both playoffs, regular season, and preseason, I think it starts to approach like 560, 570, a lot of different games. So been a lot of stadiums, but I played in Arrowhead as a player on the Chiefs team, then also as an opponent with both the Steelers and the Saints. And even back then, there's no other place like it. I mean, it is a special place. And I know that would sound like me being a homer right now because of my history, but even beforehand, there was nothing like it.
I'm curious what your thoughts are on this Chiefs team right now. Obviously, they're coming off a loss. They're getting ready to go against Carolina to try to get back in the win column. A lot's being made about the offense, and more so the left tackle spot, and how that's impacting Mahomes not being able to maybe make the throws he wants to throw, get his feet set. I'm curious what your thoughts are on the offensive side of the ball right now.
Well, they certainly are having some issues. There's no doubt about it. And I think what Coach Reed says is true. I mean, you're going to have some hiccups at time, and you have to deal with people. I know this last week was different because Suamate Ia was a healthy scratch, and he's certainly have some, probably to a degree, confidence problems, not in the way that maybe people would think, but it's hard for me to explain being an offensive lineman. But anyhow, I've seen folks like that. Today I had the good fortune, I was doing some radio, and I spoke with Chad Brown, who was another 15-year veteran, who was a teammate of mine with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And he had a tough time when he came into the league. He was a second-round pick. I remember Brenson Buckner, who has spent some time with the Chiefs. He came in as a first-round pick with the Steelers. And I remember both those guys who were expected to do a lot, and they really had rough rookie years. They had a hard time adjusting to the speed of the game, and they ended up being very, very solid players. Of course, anytime you play 15 years like Chad did, that's a very solid player, although I think Brenson had a pretty long career as well. But sometimes it just clicks quicker with some than others, and you never know how that's going to be. There's another first-round choice when I was with Pittsburgh, which was Leon Searcy, and that man was a straight man, and he had the heaviest hands I've ever seen, and the demeanor of "you can't do anything to me," and he stepped right in, and he did a great job, and was one of the best tackles in the league for a myriad of years. But it just kind of depends. I think I can go back even a little bit when I was on the sideline broadcasting. I remember Eric Fisher had a tough time early on. You could tell his confidence was shaken a little bit. I think he would admit as much. I don't mean it in a bad way. I mean, it's a very ego-driven world, and it's a tough world. And what Big Red says about it, those guys on the other side of the line, there's some good rushers, and there really is, no matter each and every week. So you're dealing with it. You amp it up a step in the NFL, and you know what? It's tough. It takes a little bit of getting used to the speed of everything that goes on.
I got to ask, as an offensive lineman, and I know you did mostly long snapping, but you've also played some offensive line as well. I know when you are facing a blitz like that, and Spags loves to do that with linebackers, with DBs, try to go out there, and it can be a lot for an offensive lineman. What do you make of what Spags is doing with this defense right now?
Yeah, he does a nice job. And first off, you're right. Yeah, I wasn't a backup offensive lineman. You wouldn't see it now, but I weigh about 245 now. I used to weigh 310. So back then, if it wasn't bolted down, I was eating it just to say heavy. I was a center. On my best days, I might have been average, probably still a little bit below average in my fourth year or so. But what I'm getting at is, as a center, you're always picking out the middle of backer, and then you're looking to see how many is in the box, and then you're looking for a joker, which would be a defensive back of some sort who's not in the box per se, but maybe is a threat, and you're trying to figure those things out. So when you see Patrick Mahomes or any QB calling things out, that's what they're figuring out, is the protection of where they're going to do things. They've got the count. It basically starts in the center, one way or the other, and you figure out where you have your numbers side of things, or where you have the numbers advantage. So what I'm trying to get at is Spags does a nice job, I think, of disguising a lot of things and maybe confusing the other team at times, and not necessarily the QB. The QB may be on par with everything, but if some of those linemen can't quite discern where people are or what they're doing, if they're coming up, if they're in the box, if they're not in the box, what you get oftentimes is unblocked rushers, and now you kind of steal a sack where nobody gets you and you come free. That'd be about the only way I would ever get a sack if I were on the defense, was to not be blocked. But either way, I think that's something he does really, really well. And when you look at this last week with Buffalo, I think this is one of the first games where there wasn't somebody that came completely free and got one of those free sacks. Buffalo did a nice job of protection and everything they did. But if you listen to Josh Allen this week, he talked about that last play. He said, we knew this situation. We knew this is what they were going to do. They were going to play man. I think he said play man. And then the minute I snapped it, they moved to something, and I was like, oh, crap. They went to a different coverage, and everything we've got is dead. And really the only option I think he felt like he had was to run the ball in. Of course, he did for the touchdown and everything. So there's a point also where Spags had the perfect call on, but you also had a superstar QB who made a play. And I think that's the difference between Buffalo and some of the other one-score games that we have won, where we could have lost because you didn't have that true superstar QB doing things like Josh did. So in general, Spags just seems to have a really good feel for the game. And honestly, I don't know him that well. We've talked some, but we didn't talk a lot. And But I know this. I know the defense has complete confidence in what he's doing, and he now has confidence in the players. And he's always talked about the fact that really he doesn't really know what he has till he gets through midseason. And of course, it's been a little bit tougher this year with the loss of Watson and some things going on there. But they'll figure it out and see how they make up for some what we would call perceived weaknesses. For them, it's just things they have to deal with.
A couple more questions with you, Kendall. I did want to ask again about the defense, because I know on Wednesday and Thursday in some of the Chiefs press conferences with Andy Reid and Chris Jones, the topic of the lack of sacks came up, because the Chiefs were second in that category last year. They're getting a lot of pressures, but they're not getting the sacks there. I'm wondering what you think they can do. We had Sean Smith, the former defensive lineman. He was on the podcast yesterday, and he mentioned that part of it is due to the Chiefs not playing with the lead in a lot of situations. And it feels like if the Chiefs do have a lead, those sacks will eventually get there, because opposing teams, when they're behind, naturally, they'll throw more. Do you agree with that assessment?
I do. I'm glad you told me about that. I remember Sean. He was a teammate of mine and a great dude. I ran into him at a Super Bowl a few years back at some parties. I'm glad you told me that story beforehand, because I agree with it, but I wouldn't have come up with it. But you're right. Anytime the defense can pin their ears back a little bit and feel like it's a team that absolutely has to pass more than run, you're going to have a better chance of things, because the run doesn't have as much chance of hurting you with things. So I think that's a very fair statement. And he's right. The Chiefs haven't played with the lead like they have in the past. So, these things come in bunches, and when you get bigger sample sizes, they generally even out. But it's certainly something that the Chiefs need to do. And I think the other thing, too, is when you look at the past in the sacks that the Chiefs have done and how they've done things, you get offensive coordinators that said, listen, we've got to get rid of the ball quicker this week, and we're going to go with the shorter pass game and whatnot. Doesn't mean that they don't hold it at times, but more often than not, they're trying to get rid of that ball, closer to the 2-second time frame as opposed to 2.5.
As a special teams guy, I have to ask you about Dave Toub, because it just seems like whoever is the return specialist, whether it's McCluster, Tyreek Hill, or even guys like a Quentin Demps or a Niall Davis, guys who only did it for a little bit, still had some success. And then some of the other things, I remember a couple of years ago against the 49ers, he had some great trick up his sleeve where he made the 49ers offensive line jump and pushing them out of field goal range. Obviously, the blocked field goal a couple of weeks ago. He was even a guy that was mentioned for a candidate for a head coach early in the Andy Reid regime here. I'm curious what your thoughts are on Dave Toub and the jobs he's doing as a special teams coordinator.
Dave Toub is a good friend, and he is a great communicator, and I think that's a big thing. And aside, and that's why he's assistant head coach. That's the respect that Big Red has for him. But aside from the head coach, the special teams coach is the one who deals with the most players at the same time, as you might imagine. The only guys that aren't in there are probably your star running backs, your star wide receivers, and, of course, your QBs. Everybody else is in that meeting, special teams, in one way, shape, or form. So I think the way he communicates, he obviously understands the game very, very well. I'm pretty certain the Big Red really relies on his opinion of a lot of things, not just special teams, but what he thinks of players and I guess his evaluation of players. So I think this is just a guy who has a long history with Big Red. And again, I go back to it because I think it's the biggest thing also about Andy Reid also, which is the communication side of things. The best coaches that I ever had at any level were the ones who communicated with me the best. And that doesn't mean that they told me good things that I wanted to hear. It means that they told me the truth in a way that I could handle it and that was dignified, and I could go about my business and try to get myself better if it was something that really wasn't that flattering.
By the way, I'm glad you mentioned the meetings thing, because I've always wondered this. Obviously, when the offense and the defense, when they're having their meetings, it can happen at the same time because there's no player that's doing, both at the same time. But you mentioned special teams. You're dealing with guys on both sides. I would imagine special teams, they have to have their meetings at a completely separate time. That way it doesn't interfere with offense and defense. How do teams handle that?
Yeah, every team that I ever played for, special teams was the first thing in the morning. After a quick team meeting with the coach, you would break the special teams might be beforehand. Now that I think about it, with some, but yeah, you had special teams meetings, and then after that, if guys weren't in special teams like I mentioned, then they were with their position coaches, or they just weren't in a meeting. But they meet together because it's 1/3 of the game, and then after that, you go to O&D, and then just like in practices, special teams they have some pre-practice, probably 10 or 15 minutes. They go over it, and then they have a period or two at the end of practice as well. So, I think the good teams, the smart teams, the well-coached teams know how big a difference the special teams makes in this league. I mean, for me, my first foray into that was with the Steelers with Bill Cowher, who was elevated from a player directly into a special teams coach under Marty when he was at the Browns. And so, I mean, he, as a head coach, was actually the one who ran the special teams meetings, even though we had a separate special teams coach.
Last question I wanted to ask you about Harrison Butker. I know he's hurt right now, but he is expected to come back in a couple of weeks. But man, he has made some huge kicks for Kansas City, especially in AFC Championship and Super Bowls, game tying or game winning kicks. And if you look at the top three players in NFL history in terms of field goal percentage efficiency, he's third on that list. And the two guys above him, Eddie Pinheiro, who the Chiefs will see this week, and Justin Tucker, they're not too far. It's less than like 0.5%. They're all very close. My point is Butker is extremely consistent. What do you see in a guy like Butker? Why is he so good at what he does?
Well, you know, he's a smart guy. He went to Georgia Tech, and you know what? They're not teaching basket weaving at Georgia Tech. They've got real majors, and so he's a bright guy. He understands the intricacies of it at a level that none of us would probably be able to comprehend. But he's a big kid too. I mean, 6'2", 6'3", somewhere in there. I think maybe 215, 220. So he's got a big leg. He's one of the bigger kickers you'll find. But you know, he just has a calm way about him, and you know, he believes in what he's doing. I think he's well coached with Tobe, which is to say, Tobe understands, and good special teams coaches understand that they know a little bit about kicking, but not a lot. And you don't actually coach that part of it, because most kickers have their own coach off the field, maybe not in the city, but somebody they work with in the off season with stuff. But I just think, he's somebody who got his chance and has honed his craft to a degree that's really amazing. I spoke with Lawrence Tynes earlier today, actually, and we were talking about Butker, and he just mentioned about those things, how big a kid he was, and how everything's going. And we were talking about his knee injury a little bit, because obviously it's a left knee, and that's where you get all that torque. And Lawrence dealt with some things as well. And he assumed that, he should be back here in a few weeks once you get that going. But it's tough. There's no doubt about it. You talked about Tucker. Tucker's better than everybody else because he's been doing it so darn long, and he's got that type of percentage. Because the kid that's coming in that you mentioned, I forget his name, well, he's only a few years in. I mean, kudos to him that he's got those numbers. But Tucker, and however many years he's been doing it, is amazing to me. And that's something that Lawrence Tynes has talked about before. But even my good friend Morton Anderson played in the league for 25 years in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And I've talked to him before about Tucker, and he's like, he's the GOAT. I mean, that is the best kicker. He goes, yeah, I'm proud of myself. I made it into the Hall of Fame, yada, yada, yada. But Tucker is the best kicker I've ever seen.
I got to ask you real quick. I know it's the last question, but this will be the last one, I promise. So I mentioned, in those types of situations, and you mentioned Lawrence Tynes, who made a huge kick against the Chargers.
Kicks. Yeah.
And I remember he kind of struggled in that game as well. Listen, I know you guys are pros, but you guys are human as well. Like, there have to be some nerves that kick in, because the snap has to go well, the hold and the kick, regardless of the distance. How do you stay calm in those situations? Because if one of those things go wrong in the operation, everyone's going to talk about that on talk radio and for the next 6 days. How do you stay calm in that entire situation, you, the holder, and the kicker?
Well, actually, Lawrence and I also talked about that today also, which was, you just have to, it sounds cliche, but you just have to trust the process and understand that field goal to win the game from 53 yards, it is the same kick as an extra point for him back when it was on the 2-yard line or whatever. I mean, it is the same thing. And that's always, for me, a field goal. Every field goal I snap, be it in the first quarter or in the overtime to win a game, is 8 yards. And every time I snap it, the ball rotates 3.5 revolutions so that the laces are out, so you catch it. And every time I snap it, the ball's about a foot to 18 inches above the spot with the laces out, so they can catch it and just set it down and give the kicker the best possible look at the ball, so he feels like he's just basically kicking off a tee in pregame.
Kendall, one last time before you go, in case anyone joined a little later in the live stream, how can people check out the work you do on the radio and also the work you do off the field with veterans?
Absolutely. I'm just going to talk about the veterans and the first responders. WHFV.org to find out more about War Horses for Veterans, or for all vets and first responders or anybody wants to help. If you go to warhorsesnetwork.org, that's basically an aggregate site to get information and help for those. And so it's not just our nonprofit, but it's other nonprofits on there as well that maybe have different things that they do that makes more sense for folks who come there. So we've just tried to aggregate that information and just help as many folks as we can.
Former Chiefs Pro Bowl long snapper and also formerly with the Chiefs Radio Network. Hey, Kendall, thank you so much for joining us here on the podcast. Hopefully we can talk to you again down the road. Appreciate your time, and hopefully the Chiefs can pull off the three-peat this year.
You bet. Take care. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Kendall. Appreciate it. That is Kendall Gammon, former Chiefs long snapper, and also spent several years with the Chiefs Radio Network. Great to have him on. A lot of great insight there from Kendall Gammon. We're going to go ahead and wrap this up. My name is Farzin Vasugan. Thank you all for downloading and listening to this episode of the Chiefs Zone podcast. If you didn't have a chance to check out yesterday's guest, Sean Smith, he was on the podcast as well. So please, if you haven't checked that out, it's available on Facebook, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, anywhere where you can check out the Chiefs Zone podcast. Otherwise, I'll talk to you all later for the Red Friday live chat. And don't forget, pregame live chat, 8:30 a.m. Central Time on Sunday for Chiefs Panthers. I'll talk to you all then. Take care.